Yo, we're going to talk about Section 2 cost and funding. So, the name of the game here, always with cost and funding, is if you can, within reason, say, this is mathematically, logically, based in sound research and data, how we got to this number, you're going to be okay. But what you have to do before you can touch this section is finish Section 1. Not only do you have to finish Section 1, it must be final. Because if you change Section 1, it's going to change all of this math. Okay? So make sure you're at a very sound place with Section 1 before you even touch this section. Otherwise, you're just going to be doing a lot of work and then having to come back and adjust. So, Section 2 is cost and funding. Now, there is essentially like three places that we get money from for the federal government, okay? Through income taxes, meaning that people pay out of their income federal income tax based on how much money they make and what their family status is. So like I don't know, I make $52,000 a year, and I think I take home like $38,000 after taxes. That taxes are going to the state and federal government, okay, as well as like my retirement and Social Security and so on and so forth. Okay. Another place that the federal government gets money from is payroll taxes. And you can see up here, individual income taxes amount for $1.5 trillion or 47% of the federal budget. This is individuals paying tax. Payroll taxes are paid more or less by businesses as part of being part of the economy. Okay. And then corporate income taxes are paid by corporations, right, to the federal government for profits that they are making within the United States, which is why many don't locate themselves in the United States. In fact, currently being discussed relationship to the COVID-19 pandemic is whether or not the United States federal government should bail out the cruise line industry. And many people look at the fact that they all fly or sail rather under foreign flags, like whether it be like Bermuda or Panama or some other random Caribbean country, because then they're not flying underneath the United States. They're not based in the United States, even though their passengers are primarily U.S. citizens and the companies are primarily advertising and making money off of U.S. citizens. They are not paying U.S. corporate income taxes because they fly or sail rather for other countries, right? And then, of course, there's some other areas where the federal government takes taxes in different ways, but those are the three major ways, right? So if you're looking at mathematically, that's approximately 95% of all of the income going into the federal government comes from individual income tax, payroll taxes, or corporate income taxes. I can tell you this, I don't know a ton about this. So if you have a family member that does, you should ask them. Okay, moving on. Underneath the government website, there's another video that does this. There is a link to the federal budget by category. Okay, and so you can kind of see where we spend that money. Okay, because when you're doing cost and funding, it's how much does it cost? Where are we going to get the money from? Okay, so you can take it out of some areas that are currently having money spent. You can add it to what we call the discretionary budget, which is this pot of money for just stuff. Or you can take it out of the Department of Defense and give it to the hungry kids, or you can take it from hungry kids and give it to the Department of Defense, right? And so Section 2 is interesting because you can do entirely different things within Section 2 while also funding what it is that you're trying to do. So, for example, if your entire problem is, the environmental problems caused by automobiles, and your solution is to make high-speed rail that uses magnets and electricity instead of, polluting, our highways and our air through, crazy automobile traffic, you might fund high-speed rail by taking it out of the Department of Defense or out of bailouts for the automotive industry, right? Or doing something else to enhance an area of our budget that you think is significant It could be related to what you're doing or completely unrelated, like defunding, Planned Parenthood or the Department of Defense or whatever. Okay. So there's some good sources there, specifically the Congressional Budget Office, which will point you in the right direction of where we spend our money and where you think maybe potentially you could get funding for your bill. You could also just spend money and add to the deficit, which we just did in the tune of $2 trillion for the COVID-19 pandemic stimulus, whatever acronym it had. So when you are trying to calculate spending, like, are you creating something new? What does it cost to create something new? How many employees do you need to pay? What are the operating costs of a building like that? What are the cost of supplies, projects, and training? So be thoughtful and remember, like, we're building a new high school. That one building cost $107 million, and we're not even building a brand new one. We're taking like a building that exists and we're like putting makeup on a pig type of situation here. So if a new high school costs 107 million, is that a lot of money? To me, sure. To you, probably. To our community, seems like it. But to the United States, that's nothing. To the state of Wisconsin, that's nothing. Okay? And so you got to be like, don't worry about spending fictitious monopoly money for a bill that actually doesn't exist. Okay? You want to be reasonable because you want to make it so that people will consider it as viable, but you don't have to consider it as being, like very fiscally conservative unless that's your jam, because this is all not real. Okay, it's fake money. Okay, so if it is $100 billion, as long as you're approaching that from a sound, logical, mathematical place where you're saying this is what it's estimated to cost for X, Y, and Z, then you'll probably be okay. And I'll give you an example. So if you are going to require all law enforcement officers in the entire country of the United States to wear body cameras to hold them accountable for police brutality, being the preventive step you're trying to take, you could figure that out, right? How much does a body camera cost? How much does it cost to like have a central computer server that houses this video? Do you need to hire somebody to manage that system? Is there a federal agency that already does this? How many police officers and law enforcement personnel are in the United States? And then you can compute that math and you can come up with a ballpark figure and say, this is what we're allocating for this bill. Or you could say, it is up to all law enforcement agencies in America to to burden this financial cost, right? Or it's up to the state of Wisconsin to cover state officers there. It's up to California to cover California, or whatever. As long as you are being just logical and thoughtful, you can do whatever you want to do. But that's how you would approach trying to figure out how much that costs. So in the end, like, you could determine where the money comes from by looking at federal or state agencies that already exist and have a viable budget, and you could reallocate money from one place to another. So you can take, like, let's say there is an aircraft carrier that is being built by some random company in New Hampshire, and we're spending $750 billion on it. You could say, yep, we're going to take that aircraft carrier and we're going to say, stop building that, and we're going to say, build this other thing instead. Or if you think we're wasting money by funding any sort of, federal education funding, you can cut all the funding to the Department of Education, abolish it, and use that money to build up the wall around the state of Florida so nobody else travels there ever again because it's a horrible state. Or whatever, right? So just try and look at what the budget is being allocated for. If there's something you think is unnecessary, you can eliminate it. If there's something that you think should be funded more, you can fund it more. You could also just like increase taxes. So you can say we're just going to implement like a new federal income tax, and it's going to be 2% across the board, and it's going to give us this amount of funding, and then of that amount of funding, we are going to use it for this. Okay. So if you do that, you have to say, this is what we're going to get if we increase federal income taxes, estimated, and then we're going to allocate that money in the following way. There you go. You could also fine people for certain types of behavior. So you could say, like, people who violate this law will get fined X, Y, and Z, and then we'll take that money to fund the enforcement. Now, eventually, You got to be thoughtful with that, because if you are having a financial penalty for a certain behavior, eventually that behavior is going to go away, right? People are going to stop doing that because they don't want to pay money. So then what happens? Then where do you get your funding from? Okay. So you got to be thoughtful about that. There you go. Section 2. Keep it real. Hartman out.